coming in this morning. Obviously, we know that this is a difficult time. It's probably more difficult for parents than for children. But what we want to try and do is get rid of some of the fear, if you like, because you're well informed and you know exactly what to do. And I will be saying some things that some of you will have done your homework, you'll be well aware of. But hopefully I'll try and cover something that you might already not have been aware of. We've got the video running already this morning. That's so it can go on the website. It's only on the screen, so it's only going to be the slides and my voice. If you want to raise pertinent questions, that's absolutely fine, or if you want to save them to the end when the video stops rolling, that's fine as well. Okay, I should say I'm Debbie Crowd, one of the Vice Principals here. Okay, so the objectives this morning are to understand what the selection test, that 11 plus what it involves, to begin to think about whether it's appropriate for your child, and of course that's a different decision for every parent to go through, and to understand how best to prepare your child for the selection test. So you may or may not have seen this booklet. It's not out yet for this year. This is last year's booklet, but it is available on the CSSE website. So even if you just Google CSSE Essex, you will find it. There's quite a few other CSSEs, so do put Essex at the end. And you'll get onto the website. And this is the booklet that's downloadable. Now, as I say, this one's a year out of date. The new one hasn't come out yet. This one is for entry this coming September, after the test that took place in September. None of the pens work. None of the pens work. Keep scribbling them. They're brand new pens. Just keep scribbling. And we can send them back round again if it's not working. So the key dates, actually, they introduced a July deadline to actually register your child for the 11 plus test recently. And now the deadline this year is the 1st of July, so you've actually got to register them by the 1st of July. Registration opens in May, 14th of May, so you're given a 6-week window there to register your child for the 11 plus test. Don't worry, we will keep reminding you that the window is open, and you will get further information from us. We then take, the child will then take the test on the 21st of September. You actually get the results mid-October, so they have a really quick turnaround of less than a month. And you know those results, and that's why they changed the timing of the test. It's a very early test. They've only just got back off 6 weeks holiday, but the idea is that they're then well informed for when you make your application. When you're filling in your application form for your child, you may well be aware there's 5 choices to make, and clearly some of those choices would be wasted if if your child were not to meet the threshold if they put down grammar school places. So the idea is you know before you have to put the names of those schools down whether your child has met that threshold on the day in the test itself. So the end of October is when you have to give in that form. So it's quite a tight deadline there. They do the test in September, you get the marks mid-October, and then you have to submit your form to the local authority with your 5 preferences by the end of October. You need to be aware of all your options, because if the test goes in one direction and you know that you've got what you want, then things can be quite easy. But if you haven't got backup plans, it's not long enough to come up with backup plans in those 2 weeks, especially as one of them is usually half term. We will hold another secondary admissions meeting nearer the time that will talk a bit more about that process. So obviously the selection test itself, all the information you need is at that address. So it's csse.org.uk, or as I said, you can just do a Google search for CSSE Essex. So now, that September sitting, it's been in place now for 5 years that they've brought it earlier in the year. It helps you to make that informed decision on the application form for the local authority. So that's csse.org.uk, as we still writing it down. So when you do get that result, those results of your child's test, it gives you advice on whether there's a realistic chance of your child getting in. And it is only an indication. We have a number of ring-fenced places in the area that are for local children, and they have a lower threshold. At the moment, the threshold is 303 for a local child to get in. And that usually gets them into one of the grammar schools. Now, it's not the same for every grammar school. We'll come on to that a little bit later. But generally, if your child scores over 303, they'll get one of those allocated places. Of course, if we reach a year when we fill all those allocated places, and there aren't enough places for all the children who've got 303, then they will increase the 303, and few, children who've even reached that might not get in, and it will be marginal increases, I'm sure. So, as I say, you make your 5 preferences at the end of October, and you don't actually hear for sure which school your child is offered a place at until the beginning of March. So they changed the selection test. The content of the test was changed a few years ago. They wanted it to be more helpful for children who are in mainstream schools. So they used the papers that the children used to sit in mainstream schools, so the Key Stage 2 SATs papers that used to be levelled. They used that sort of material, that sort of style. And that is the same as the children are using now. They're used to that. It's the level bit that's different, but we'll come on to that in a little while later. So they now have an English paper, the reading paper, the writing paper, both of which you've got samples of in front of you, and a maths paper. Okay? And the idea is that they're very similar to the ones that the children are used to doing anyway. They got rid of verbal reasoning. They decided that having a discrete verbal reasoning paper was something that children could be tutored to somehow manage to get the answers, and it just didn't fit in any way with children at a mainstream school. They wouldn't be doing verbal reasoning, and it was giving them a disadvantage as well. So the sample materials, as I say, are available on the website. I'd ask you not to take these away with you. We do use past papers with the children, and clearly, if they've done that already at home, then you need to be wary that they're going to come home with good scores. We have mock tests, and if your child has already done that paper, then they're going to get a much better score. But we do have a couple of opportunities for mock tests. We'll have one in the May, and then we have another one in September itself, just before the test, as soon as the children come back after their 6 weeks holiday. We'll talk about that a bit more in a while as well. So our advice regarding how to prepare your child is based on advice from the grammar school. Some of the information is from the CSSE website itself. So the English paper, as I say, it's got the comprehension, grammar and vocabulary questions. Your children know, I'm sure they talk about their SPAG lessons, spelling, punctuation, grammar, or GPS, grammar, punctuation, spelling, depending on how you want to say it. Because all of our children are immersed in that SPAG right from the early days, they are able to shine in this anyway. 2 pieces of creative writing. Again, if you've looked at the sample papers, they've got a little bit better with that, but I think the original sample paper was describe an animal and instructions for making a piece of jam on toast. Not particularly challenging questions. They're just looking for a child who understands how to write for a purpose. You don't want to get too flowery and creative with instructions, otherwise they stop being good instructions, but also can use the creative side in the description work. So overall, they have an hour with some additional reading time to do the reading paper and the creative paper, with 60 marks in total for the English. So the usual comprehensions that they use are they will be more grown-up texts. They are trying to find something that the children won't have already come across. They want it to be alien to them, so that they can ask the child to come up with what they think might be a meaning of a word, just from the context of what's in front of them. So it will have challenging new vocabulary in it. They've used a lot more modern texts recently rather than the more dated ones. They do include questions on grammar, punctuation and comprehension, and as I say, the grammar and punctuation should be an easy fix. Put the punctuation into this. Your child should be able to do that quite easily, full stops, capital letters and whatever. But they've also added in a few new elements. They try and put a little bit of reasoning within the questions because they're trying to differentiate between the children who are the most able, if you like. So they want children to be able to work out what a word means from its context. They want children to be able to dig for answers and find the evidence within the text. So the best preparation is just the reading side. You don't have to ask your child to read a whole book though, just a small excerpt of a piece of text that they're able to then ask questions about. Obviously, some children will love to read more challenging text, but if your child isn't enjoying it, you don't want them to have to sit and go through it. It would just put them off. Recent advice from Westcliff High School for Boys said that 19th century texts were particularly good preparation. We'll note that, because you never know where you're going to get these hints. But just looking at excerpts from these, there's a wealth of materials that are provided that you can get in W.H. Smith's Waterstones that are for this purpose. Short excerpts from texts with questions to get the child digging for those answers. And as I say, it's the reading, and if your child's reading regularly, they're coming across that vocabulary anyway. The maths paper, it's got, as I say, questions that are very much linked to what we are teaching in Key Stage 2. It also has these extra questions that are trying to get the reasoning out of a child, and again, the paper is an hour and is worth 60 marks in total. The maths, though, is set at the higher expectations. When I mentioned levels earlier, they aimed it at the level 4 and the level 5 questions. Now, in old terms, that's basically level 4 is where you'd expect a child, you would have expected a child to be at the end of year 6. So they would look at level 4, the average, and the questions being above that. They don't have the easy questions, the old level 3 questions, we would say, that the Key Stage 2 normal SATs test would involve, because they're not trying to ease your child in gently, basically. They're going straight for the harder questions. But as I say, the style and format is very similar to those Key Stage 2 SATs papers. And the papers are trying to challenge, but they're not trying to trick. They're trying to make the child think and see what they can push them to do. But actually, a child only needs just over half marks to pass the maths test. They're not expecting a child to get everything right. So, don't be disheartened if your child does, come back with a mock test that's low. They're not expecting a child to get anywhere near full marks, because it really is a challenge. There aren't any easy questions, as I say, but they also weight those questions so that if more children get it right, it's worth less. And the ones that few children get right, they weight them so they're worth more. At a recent meeting we had at a local grammar school, we were told that the best preparation for maths is the use of a Year 7 textbook, which is a bit scary, because your children have just started Year 5, and they're taking a test when they're barely into Year 6. And certainly that's something that we've reflected on, and I'm sure you'll be aware that as a school, we can only teach children the content for the Year 5. That's the national curriculum that the government has directed us to. We are not allowed to move the children forward more quickly through the Year 6 or 7 work. What we can do, though, is we have our booster sessions, and we also will use a programme to provide extra work on My Maths that your child can do at home. We'll come to that in a moment again as well. So as I say, in the classroom, the children are doing challenging work, but that's pushed even further by these mastery tasks that are part of our Singapore maths approach. And those are getting the children to reason, and they're getting them to apply their knowledge, which is absolutely perfect for addressing questions in the 11 plus. So putting their maths, applying it in other ways, stands them in good stead. But actually, within those lessons, we can't push the children's additional content through to Year 6 and Year 7. So that's done through the boosters, the one-day summer school, and as I say, the My Maths programme. So we do use a lot of past papers in our booster clubs. So if you are doing past papers at home, your children will come across the same content, but it's not a bad thing. You might find your child sits and does one question and you go through it, they get it right, and if they look at it a month later, they don't recall it, and you're getting them to go through that same process again. So seeing the same material isn't necessarily a bad thing. With the My Maths, we are able to set the children the higher work for Year 6, and there's an extension pack as well. So if your child goes to the Maths Booster sessions, we will set them up with a login, an additional login. It's not the same, thank you ever so much. It's an additional login, not the one that they use for their regular homework. That will stay separate. This will be an extra set of challenging resources that if you want your child to use is there at your fingertips. We won't be chasing them for it. We won't be saying, come on, you haven't done that homework, because as I say, that's not part of the Year 5 curriculum, but we do provide it so it's there for your use if you wish. I also recall from the meeting at Westlake High for Boys that they said they used MyMaths and they very much see that as a really useful homework tool. The good thing about MyMaths is, although it's pushing the content on through Year 6 and Year 7, there is the lesson function that many of you will be aware of. You press the L in the corner and it will it'll take your child through step by step what they need to do. So even if, and it happens to us all, you're not familiar with what it is they're being asked, you can click on the lesson function and either your child can work through it themselves or with a bit of help, and they can work through that additional content. And as I say, through the booster groups we'll be looking at that as well. So the pass mark for the test itself, it's remained at 303, and the standard required to achieve 303, we are assured, has remained the same. And Robin Bevan, up at Southend High for Boys, said just over 50% gives a chance, 70% a virtual guarantee. So they're not looking for anything, huge mark-wise. I'm sorry this is so small, but this has actually come off the CSSE website, so you'll be able to look at it in more detail. What this is it has each of the schools down the left-hand side that are part of the testing for success, if you like, the schools that take the grammar children. And we've got Southend High School for Boys there at the top. And if you look, it says the schools, you get the numbers there for the children, for the score of the lowest score for the child that went to that school. So over the last few years, you can see that there's been a slight increase to getting in to Southend High for Boys to 308 for those local children. If you look, it's in the yellow box, if you're looking at the screen there. It's 329 for children who are outside that priority area. The priority area is any of those postcodes, and if you're out there, it's 329. It's a considerably higher score for children outside the area to reach that threshold. For most of the other schools there, you'll see that for local children it remains at 303. Okay, the ones that are much higher there are the Colchester and Chelmsford ones, except for that Southend High for Boys. In the last 4 years, every pupil with a score at this level was eventually offered a place. Okay. So, from the recent 2009 entry booklet that I showed you earlier, this quote was taken. The results of all candidates will be analysed by date of birth to determine if a statistical age adjustment is required. In recent years, no such adjustment has been applied. And I must admit, it was a parent who said to me, oh, I've definitely been told there's age standardisation. I thought, I've never heard that there's age standardisation. But obviously, they have considered it, but in recent years they haven't had to take into account a child's age. And I don't know how they're doing that. That's the most information we've got. But actually, it might be different this year. So if you have got a summer-born child, who knows? They might take that into account. I suppose it depends on if they can see a real difference between the results of the children who are born at the different times of year. Who knows? But they definitely have that on their radar. I've been asked a number of times how they get to 303. Again, this is directly from the CSSE website. It does give you an explanation. I must admit, I'm not sure it's an explanation that's going to be helpful to too many people. I certainly haven't spent the time trying to get beyond it. So it's all based on the averages. As I say, the questions apparently are weighted, so if more children get it right, it's worth less. But that's the scoring, as I say. It's there and it's on the website as well.
That's not one of the maths questions though, is it?
No. Can you imagine? It's bad enough for me. Okay, so one of the things that the CSSE have said that they want to avoid. And one of the reasons they took away the verbal reasoning was the over-prevalence of tutoring, where it's just getting children to get through the test, but they may then struggle when they're in a grammar school because they're actually, you know, they might find it more difficult. So their advice, and this is only their advice, is for children to spend a few hours familiarising themselves with the style of responses that are required in the papers. And they've said this can be done at home using materials and papers available on the CSSE website. So there are papers to download, the sample papers have come directly from there. There's also a place where you can order the more up-to-date papers, and obviously those come at a cost. I would just say again that the more up-to-date ones are the ones that we use. The very latest ones, I don't think they're released to you as parents because we use them as mock tests in schools. And obviously, again, you wouldn't have a proper mock test if most of the children had already seen it at home. Okay. So obviously, and this again is a statement from them, they want to they want to take in the children, select the children who have the potential to thrive in a grammar school environment. And they list a whole amount. I'm not quite sure why they're white at the bottom. They're not supposed to be highlighted any other way. I think it's just that I've changed it to black so it's clearer. But literally, there's a whole list of things that they want from the children. Not all in the same child, obviously, but a list of the different qualities. So largely speaking, they're looking to take, you know, from the top 25% of the cohort locally. So if you're looking to prepare your child for the test, it's about getting the child to feel comfortable, basically. You want them to know when they're sat in front of the test, I'm used to this, I know the sort of things that are going to come up, I know roughly how long it takes and how long I've got for each question because, you know, I've done this before. So it's about getting them familiar with the papers. And then it's about the thinking processes. You want them to be able to develop systematic methods. How are you going to go about this? What are the tools that you're going to apply? And then it's this fluency, repeating further, faster, harder. Things like just knowing their times tables so they don't have to work anything out. Times tables and division links are at their fingertips and they don't have to think about it, it's automatic. So I'll go through again the support that's from us. We obviously have these workshops for parents to come along and find out about it. And then the 11 plus sessions start in January. As I say, it has to be an extra because we can't deliver it in the curriculum time. So Tuesday mornings at 8 o'clock. It will start on the 15th of January, and that will be for the maths. And Wednesday, 8 o'clock, starting on the 16th of January, for English. Obviously, you'll have seen that from the letter that you've already had that advertised the workshop. But you can book those online if you click onto the parent mail system to say that you want to sign up your child for that. If you're in any doubt about that, just nip into the office and ask them to be put on the list. Then in, as I say, June, we have this initial practice test. That can help support parents in deciding whether to enter their child or not. I have to say we might make that May this year because the deadline being the 1st now, the 1st of July, that might be quite a tight turnaround.
So we can let the kids go all the way up to that and then we can decide.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yes, you don't have to make that decision beforehand.
Still going to benefit them doing the extra lessons in the evenings, isn't it?
Absolutely, there's no harm in them coming along. In fact, that's a really good point. If there was a child coming to the sessions and we felt it was having an impact on their self-esteem because they were struggling, we would have a quiet word.
Okay.
Other than that, every child is welcome, okay? But we don't want any of them to feel negative about themselves because they feel it's beyond them. There's also then the one-day summer school. Now that's always on the last day of the holidays before any inset days. So for this coming year, it's the 30th, yes it is, Tuesday the 30th of August, because we've then got the, taken that from the letter.
Friday, I think.
I was going to say something's not right
Away,
about that.
yeah.
It is the Friday, you're right. It won't let me change it, but thank you for that. Yes, it's the Friday because we come back on the Monday and Tuesday for inset days. Your children are still off. We do recognise that that's difficult. Some people will be away. It's a few hours, it's 3 hours.
Oh,
You know, if your child can come, great. If they can't, please don't be, overly worried. Again, we'll have that full rehearsal morning in school, the full mock again at the beginning of September, pretty much as soon as they come back, so you can immerse them back into the practice that way. For the May-June mock test, we mark that and we send it home fully marked for you, so you can see an indication of where your child is, and that helps to inform you for whether you put your child in for the test or not. But in the September one we don't. We send back the unmarked paper with the mark scheme. Obviously it's in your interest, you want your hands on those papers as soon as you can, and we just trying to turn it around, mark it and get it back to you before the test is difficult. But what we do then do is offer drop-in sessions. So if your child is struggling with any area, they can bring the test paper in, you can come on in with them, and we will help support the children.
Sorry,
at
I missed that. So the early September they do a mock and then you don't mark it.
We don't mark that one. That one will come home with you.
But then we can bring it in here.
You can bring it in, yes. Your child, by this point, we have My Math sessions that are mornings. The boosters will stop at the end of the summer term, and we'll just have the My Math sessions. My Math sessions will take place from about mid-May, where we'll open up the ICT suite early morning and the children are able to come in and do the extra My Maths in the morning before school. But it fits in well because they'll have done their mock tests. That's an opportunity for them to bring those papers in as well. Okay. So then the test day is Saturday morning. It says usually about the third week back, as you saw from the first slide. We do have that date now, which is Saturday, the 22nd, no, that was this year, 21st of September 2019 for next year. It's now been announced.
Do you have limited places for the sessions?
No.
It's open to all, is it?
It's open to all. And then we do offer support with parents making choices, completing the form. We will have another secondary admissions meeting anyway to go through the application process and how to use your 5 choices to best. So, there are chances to find out more about that near the time.
Where does the test held then?
There are all the different grammar schools.
Oh, okay.
When obviously there's so many different feeder schools from so many different counties. The tests are sat at the schools themselves.
The one that you want your child to go to?
No, it doesn't have to be at all. You choose the one that's best for your child.
Oh, okay.
Because, it's all about the atmosphere, people do travel for miles around. I think at the moment, the best places are the ones that are less known about more widely. So I would say Shoebury is known to be, they do have, every year I say it and I think the more and more people that go, they'll find it harder and harder to cope. But actually, they don't have the influx of people from miles around like the main grammar schools do. And they seem to bring the children in a morning, in first thing, and really make them feel comfortable. And I think in some of the others you find that there's a big queue all the way down the main road with parents who've travelled a long way. And that's a very general statement, so my apologies that that might not reflect the case at every single one of them. But I know that Shoebury's known to be a good one, and I imagine that St Bernard's, Tommy Moore's probably are less built up as well for that reason. So their aim, and they're quite blatant about it, is to take from the top 25%. But actually, it's about a child being able to cope emotionally as well as academically, because even if your child is able, it doesn't mean it's a place that they want to be. We would say that taking the 11 plus is appropriate for about half of our cohort, about 60 children. I know that the local authority sent out letters a couple of years ago. They said if your child got 2C or above, you should be, at Key Stage 1, you should be thinking about the grammar school place. And obviously we've moved on from levels now. Your children wouldn't have had a 2C, that sort of level. But actually, that was fairly low. So we found that year there was a real spike and we had about 80 children sitting the test. And then of course you end up with more disappointed children and parents. But about half the children, we always tend to have about 50 to 60 children take it every year, and that doesn't vary too much. Last year the letters got sent out to every child who was 2B and above at Key Stage 1, but as I say, they're not going to be able to do that this year because you haven't got a 2B, 2C, you've got an age-related or above age-related. And I guess they may well send it out to every child who got age-related at Key Stage 1. It'll be a large number who get the letter, and it's just prompting you to think about, if you haven't thought about it, you know, you might want to.
So when do we get them letters then?
Do you know, it's just a prompt, so that will come out when the window's open for applications. Just have you thought about it? You know, you might want to. But we'll send letters from the school to remind you about that when it's open anyway. As we say, there's always some children who we know that they are capable enough, who doesn't go their way on the day. And it can be for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's just the pressure and not having a backup plan and going into the room thinking, do you know, it doesn't matter if I do meet the threshold. We try not to talk about pass or fail either. I always try and say meet the threshold because it is about on the day, you know, it could go either way for all children, but the best way for them to feel is that actually it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
My mum and dad and I are very happy with this other school, which I know is very likely that I'll get into. So it just opens some more options if it comes off today, and if it doesn't, it's not a big deal. And it just helps them to feel more relaxed. I'm quite sure it's the parents dropping them off in the morning though that feel the sickest, to be
Will
honest.
you be talking to the children like this as well, like explaining that?
They,
Or is that
to a point, I mean, we try not to over-egg it here. You've obviously got some children who are going to feel nervous. I think most children will feel nervous about it. And it isn't part of our curriculum, but we want to support children as much as we can. But sometimes it's important not to we don't want to put pressure on either. I always say in my groups, the children that come to the My Maths groups, I'll always say, you know, just go and do your best. It's, you know, and it really doesn't matter. And I'm sure some of them look at me and think, oh, but it does. But it, you know, it doesn't ultimately. Children will do well at every school. If they've got the right attitude, they can do well at all schools. So, as we no longer have assessment measured in levels, there won't be a more recent assessment for you in levels. We'll leave that slide. So now we have the age-related expectations. We're getting more used to that. So if your child was working at or working above at Key Stage 1, you know, it's definitely worth considering. And we call age-related children who are working accurately and quickly. And then there's this sort of mastery, this greater depth level, which is being able to apply their knowledge and skills in their maths or in their English, in different areas, and being able to explain how or why they're doing it. So it's about demonstrating a deeper understanding. So it's the children that demonstrate that understanding and are able to apply, and they're flexible in their learning, that are you know, likely to thrive. So the sort of key question is, does your child relish hard work and apply themselves willingly? That's always a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, who is going to compete with a PS4 or whatever? But do visit to go and find out the culture of each particular school, because even if you're looking at a grammar place, do look at the other schools and do look at all the grammar schools, because they'll all feel very different. And if you go to as many of the different schools as you can, it will really help to inform you moving forwards. Talk to other parents and pupils at the schools. You really do need to talk to people, because if we go by what we hear in the media, we can sometimes be put off because we only ever hear the bad things, don't we? You don't very often hear the good things that a school's doing. Talk to your child.
When do we do that? Sorry,
Nearer the time. Nearer the time. I wouldn't start talking about them necessarily now. But in some ways, it's good for your child to know there's other options now. If they are doing extra work, they need to know you're working towards this, but it's an option. But, you know, let's go and see the schools. The open evenings now won't be till the summer term, though, so actually visiting will be a while away. But do talk to your child about it. Try to encourage them not to be put to favour a school because their friend's going for it, because it just doesn't work like that. And as we say, this self-esteem, it's not just about the academic, as we say, it's about how a child feels in a school and how emotionally they are able to cope with it. When we come to nearer the time, we have, as I say, we have more workshops about secondary admissions. We'll help you with your 5 choices if you want them. We'll help you complete the form. We'll help you check your form before you send it, and if you end up going to appeal, we will support you with that. Try not to make it too stressful. Talk about their work, about what they're doing at school. Try and talk about doing their best. And we do hear of people saying, we'll buy you a bike if you pass, and then that's just loading it on even more. Go and see as many different schools as you can, from the grammar and the non-selective side. Knowing they have another option, as I've said, makes them feel less under pressure. There are options at other schools as well. You might be aware that Eastwood Academy holds auditions for children in the performing arts or the sports. And because it's not likely to be a catchment school for many parents around here, but also the other school that does that now is Fitzwymark. Again, it's another Essex school, and they also do, not performing arts, but they do the sport, so the children will do a bleep test there. So Fitzwymark and Eastwood for sport, Eastwood also for performing arts. They will have, don't worry, it's year 3s up there, fine. Yes, they do an audition or a test, as I say, for the aptitude for those 2 schools. I don't need to read it, that one there. So it's very much about the positive praise, boosting their self-esteem, getting involved and interested in what they're doing in school. And it's all right to make a mistake, and it's all right to forget. However frustrating it might be when you just want to say, you know what 6/8s are, that's what's in your head, it's trying to keep it in. I'm in the same boat, my daughter's year 5 this year, so we're in the same place ourselves at home. And remember that children do succeed at every school in Southend, and it is just about that attitude to their work and their learning. We know that all the non-grammar schools around here as well are working extremely hard, and they've made such huge improvements. Do your homework, find out about them, look at their websites. There's 2 key books that will help you, and I'm letting you know early, because if you look on the website for Southend, for secondary admissions, there's the secondary admissions booklet for last year, and that will give you a picture of how many children in your area get through to each school. So it will give you an idea of the distance from a school that is the furthest that a child got in last year from. So that's on the Southend Borough website. Just look for secondary admissions booklet. Obviously, as I say, they haven't got the figures for this year, they won't have that for quite some time, but look at last year's, it's really interesting. And if you're interested in the Essex schools, clearly, there's exactly the same booklet available on the Essex website if you look for secondary admissions. And you can do exactly the same with that. You can find out how realistic it is for your child to get into an Essex school if that's your preference as well. So it is about making yourself an expert. I hope you've learnt something this morning that you didn't know before. As I say, there's lots of materials out there if you choose to go that way, and there's lots of schools to go and look at if you were to choose not to go for the 11+ direction. So I hope, as I say, if anybody's got any questions, then we'll have general questions now before we finish, and if anybody wants to stay behind, that's fine too. Oh, one other thing I should say, Shoebury has a kind of a 298+ agreement. So if your child were to just miss out on 303, Shoebury take children from the 298 bracket, if you like. So it's kind of a, not quite, but nearly there. It's a nice backup to have. It can be seen in 2 ways. If you're a parent of a child who lives in catchment, lives further out of catchment, that may not be able to go to Shoebury now because these places are now being offered to 298+ further afield, it's a bit of a knock-on and might not be such an advantage. But if your child is in that nearly but not quite position, it's a nice backup to have. So as I say, not popular with everyone, but worth knowing if you're sitting your child for the test.
So you're saying that they can do the 11 graphs,
Mhm.
get as far as sitting the actual test and getting the results, and then there's still time for us to decide whether it's right for our child to
Absolutely.
apply for other secondary schools.
Yes, because you get the results of the test, it's quite tight now.
Right.
You'll get the results about 15th, 16th of October,
Yeah.
and to be honest, you've got half term. You have to give in the form on the 31st of October.
Right.
So you could have less than a week of time when a school is physically open for you to go and visit and find out about it. So do your homework, know all your options before you get those results. So
Find out what schools and then ring them up, make an appointment, and then still sit.
absolutely, absolutely. And I know that they run a lot of open evenings right up to that 31st of October, so the parents can go and see for themselves. Are there any other questions?
Just in terms of the tutoring bit, do you see it as
Oh,
quite a negative thing?
actually, I haven't got onto the tutoring bit.
Oh, okay.
No, thank you.
Just really get
Okay.
that's all really.
I think the thing is with the tutoring, as a school, we can't say that we'd encourage it, but that doesn't mean it can't be right for some children. And they say it's not necessary, and you're worried that your child's ability is, if there's an issue with one particular area. So if you've got a child who's really good at maths, not so good at the English side, the reading side, or vice versa, you might try and compensate by using tutoring. I think their concern is that people could be tutoring in all areas, getting the child through the test, and then of course the tutoring drops away because they've got their place and they haven't got that support moving forward. But I mean, there's a quote here, based on my experience as head of lower school, coming into grammar school having just passed does not mean they will struggle, but being heavily tutored does mean that they may struggle because they've had that helping hand all the way along, and obviously the tutoring doesn't necessarily carry on. So we just ask you to think, if you do go along the tutoring lines, just think about whether, are you doing it for the right reasons? Is the person that you're having police checked? Have they got recent relevant experience in school, or is it possible they might, confuse your child with things that they're not aware have changed? And in that way, does it complement the Greenways curriculum? To be honest, the way Maths No Problem works, because it's only really a maths thing, I think, the way that maths works, the children are encouraged to come up with lots of different ways to have a go, and to see if there are different ways to do something. So I'm not quite so concerned about that one these days. But it is important how your child feels about it. If you're dragging them, kicking and screaming there, then perhaps it's not the best thing. Are they using materials that we use in school? Well, as I've said, there's not necessarily an issue, but if the child is going through the same, if it's just paper after paper after paper, and all they're doing is slogging through and they're just not getting anything from it, and they're moaning about it terribly because it's just making them feel like they can't do anything, then it might be worth just trying a different approach. As I say, there'll be the My Maths materials that will come on for you as well. They can have a look at those in their own home, and at least it's via a computer, and children usually are much more keen to get involved if they've got a device, and they can work at their own pace through that as well. And I think that just goes on to the...
They do tutor in groups like that, haven't they, where it's like a smaller class?
There's a lot of different opportunities, you're right. We know that there's one called Learning Plus Southend, that's on the letter, and they do tutoring after school 1 night a week in a group. And they also do, because these are at Chalkwell, they also do 4 mock tests spread out between March and July, I think, and they then will mark those, you'll get those back in the same way. The good thing is we can't create here in our mock tests a real mock test environment. They're sat between all their friends, they've got their own teachers, and they're in a hall that they know. But if you go to the Chalkwell ones, at least your child's going to a strange place. They may well still have friends around, but they won't have many. It'll be a very different environment. They'll be with staff they don't know, and at least it's replicating that test experience, if you like, in a way that just otherwise wouldn't be possible.